What's that lurking in your closet? Is it just imagination or is it a monster? It seems people all over the world are encountering what they call cryptid creatures. These stories always entail some odd and creepy details about them. We are now nearing 25 episodes of cryptid creatures spreading nightmares through the swamp. If you have an experience you would like to share, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. Now, let's get into these allegedly true, creepy cryptid stories. I am a bow hunter, and I like to still hunt, which is when you dress in full camo and walk through the woods rather than sit in a tree stand. Last October, I was coming down a hill into a marshy area. It was kind of late, and enough so that the side of the mountain was covered in shadows. I live in Pennsylvania where our mountains are completely covered in trees and it gets dark fast. When I get to the bottom of the hill, I noticed that it was completely silent. No sounds at all, and I felt the hair stand on my arms. But I've been creeped out before in the woods, so it wasn't too big of a deal, and I kept on. I've been hunting in this general area before, but I've never gone down this hill. I continued creeping through the woods. Mind you, I'm walking very slow, so you can barely hear my footsteps, because deer are hard to sneak up on. That's when I hear a voice call out from behind a thicket of small trees. "Help! Come over here! I'm in trouble! Help!" And I swear to God it was my brother's voice, but my brother lives in Nevada, so it couldn't have been my brother, and it said my name. It only took me a second to realize something wasn't right, and when I did, I ran faster than I ever have in my life. Only my dad knew where I was hunting that day, and this area is huge. No one would have found me, and it's too creepy to think about. My dad is way too old to play tricks on me as well, so why would he be out there doing that? Something out there knew my name, and it sounded just like my brother. I don't know what the hell it was, but I don't think I'll ever be going back to the woods again. Maybe I'll move to the desert with my brother, where at least I can see everything around me. This happened to me and my cousin, who I'll call Blake for this story, back in the fall of 2009. Our grandma decided to let us stay the night at her house, as she often did because I and my cousin were really close and she was the only relative that let us stay the night at her house. Now, her house was always creepy to us, and we always did say that our papa was probably there. He passed away 6 years before this. We thought he was still in the house watching over us. Looking back, it didn't really make sense, but it helped us sleep at night. Anyway, that night after the round of junk food and Call of Duty, we decided it was time to get some sleep. Now, one thing we always did at my grandmother's house was sleep with the TV on. That will be relevant in a minute. As we lay in our beds, we heard a loud thud come from downstairs. My eyes shot open and looked towards the door. Now, the TV wasn't super quiet, but it wasn't super loud either. It should also be noted that we were on the second floor of the house, so the fact that I heard that big of a thud was worrying to me. I turned over and shook Blake to see if he was still awake. Turns out he had been awake for longer than me because he couldn't sleep, so he heard the thud too. "What was that?" I asked. "I have no idea. You think we should check it out?" he asked. "Yeah, we need to make sure Mama is okay," I said. This was the one mistake that possibly led to what happened afterward. We both got up and slowly approached the door. I turned the doorknob and opened the door. We stepped outside into the landing. I started to turn and walk down the stairs when Blake stopped me. I turned and he seemed like he was listening for something. Then, another loud thud came from downstairs. so being the idiots we were, we didn't think about it being an intruder. Instead, we thought it was a ghost. I was really into ghost hunters and shows like that at the time, so I pulled my sister's old Razor flip phone out and started to record us asking questions. "Is there someone with us?" I asked. No response. "Papa, is that you?" Blake asked. Just then, a huge crash could be heard like something made glass hit the floor. We scrambled into the bedroom. Once we were both inside, I slammed the door shut. I breathed a sigh of relief until I heard what sounded like someone was going through the drawer on the nightstand. I turned to look at Blake. He was paralyzed, staring towards his side of the bed. The nightstand drawer was open. Again, following what I had said before, I pulled up the thermal filter on my camera on the phone. What I saw turned my blood to ice. A shadowy, humanoid figure was bent over and was digging through my drawer. My cousin had snapped out of his trance and looked at the phone. He gasped. Then the thing jerked its head to look at us. I knew it was caught. It then stood up, straight, and then turned to face us. I was terrified at this point. I just knew this thing was going to kill us both and no one would know what happened. That's when something weird happened. It disappeared. It was almost like it blinked out of existence. I wasted no time. I tore open the door, practically flew down the stairs, and I ran to the spare bedroom downstairs and turned to see if Blake followed me. Thankfully, he wasn't too far behind. Once we both were inside, I slammed the door and locked it. "What was that thing?" Blake asked. "I don't know, but I'm not going to sleep. I don't want that thing to sneak up on us." And we didn't. We stayed up watching those old sitcoms and networks that would play in the early morning until we saw sunlight peeking through the blinds in the room. We both passed out then. When we woke up, our grandmother had asked us what we were doing last night because all she heard was banging all night long. Both of our faces drained of color, but we didn't want to tell her what we saw, so we just said we couldn't sleep and stayed up most of the night. I wish that was the end, but one more terrifying event would unfold. We got my phone to go back and check the recording we had. You could hear me ask a question and heard no response, but then Blake asked his question, and he got an answer. About 5 seconds after he asked if our papa was there with us, we heard a harsh whisper say, "Yes." A few weeks later, my sister and our cousin Lee were sleeping upstairs in the dead of night, when all of a sudden, she was awoken to what sounded like a deck of cards being shuffled. Somehow, she managed to fall back asleep. An hour later, Lee was awoken by a blood-curdling scream coming from the far corner of the room. She then woke my sister up, and they ran downstairs to sleep on the couch. She said it was like it came from a woman. Then, I reluctantly told her what I and Blank had encountered a couple years before, and she looked at me in shock. That was the last creepy thing to ever happen to us in that house, because as life went on, we started going to her house less and less, and it got to a point that we all forgotten about the things that had happened. I brought it up a few later and it still sent shivers down my cousin's spine. I don't know what that creature or supernatural entity was, but it creeps me out to this day. This is the beginning of my experiences with Sasquatch. I live in Oregon and love the woods. I thought I had spent plenty of time in nature and I felt I knew what I was doing as far as animal calls, nests, tracks, and all that. As I would find out later, I had still a lot to learn. I had been camping yearly on a mountain near our area. After about 4 years in the same area, my friend and I decided to go down deeper on the mountain. We went past the campgrounds and the tourist attractions, all the way to the dead end of the forest road where a flood had taken out the only bridge. No one else camped even close to here. We were completely and utterly alone. Other than my friend hiking farther than I cared to and experiencing something following him back down, that is. At one point, he and I heard a low, quick vocal of some kind, but nothing else happened. Then came next spring. I went to the same spot by myself. Yes, I know how dumb that was. Anyway, I went thinking I could hike with everything I needed in my pack. When I first started up this old, overgrown logging trail, I heard a definite, short, sharp whoop. Announcing my presence, I continued up the road. Not too far, setting up my shelter. It was just a tarp, folded like a taco shell, with a recorder hung on a twig right next to it, so I could record things around me. I use the recorder every night, and to this day, when I camp, I still bring it with me. After settling down for the night, I hear a vehicle coming down that long, dusty gravel road. Damn. 20 minutes later, I hear dudes down the hill from me, where my truck is, and they sound like drunken yahoos. My truck. Damn. After 20 minutes of getting up, getting dressed, and packing light, cigs, gun, etc., I finally head down a trot towards my truck. This road is full of washed out banks, cutaways, and fallen logs. High grass hides the large rocks and short logs, so I have to jog carefully, yet swift as I can. Then my flashlight battery goes dim. Damn it yet again. Doing the best I can in the dark with only 1.5 feet of visibility, I continue on until I come to where a stand of young alder had slid down on the bank left to me, into the road that I am on. I am picking my way through all these branches when I hear a repeated call, very loud, very fresh, approaching the sound. It was something like, it reminded me of what a plesiosaur might sound like. It was approaching so fast, I almost thought it was flying. I have no light. I cannot run. My only option is to face it. Turning fear to irritation, I turned and loudly said, "Hey, I'm going as fast as I can. You see me leaving, so back off." Or something to that effect. At the same time of yelling, I can hear an owl call further up the hill where I had just come from. All fell silent. Then I hear a second owl call. I have to think this was a youngster, funning the human, as they truly do have a sense of humor, and the owl call was an adult calling him back. With all quiet, I continue to pick my way through. When I emerge from the sticks, I am so happy to see that the light at the end of the dark, overgrown road. There's no sign of the drunken yahoos, thank God. I stay for the rest of the night in my truck. Luckily for me, I had seen my tent before leaving home and threw it in the truck just in case. The next day I set up my tent and made my plan to begin my Sasquatch research by letting them know I am harmless. I wanted to gain their trust. I wanted to at least see more and learn anything I could about them. I hiked out to a low meadow that I heard the whoop come from the day before. My thinking was most Sasquatch are nocturnal, and they must leave lookouts or sentries during the day to keep an eye on the area while they sleep during the day. I took a lunch with me, and I should probably mention I am a 50-year-old plump housewife at this time, so you can imagine what I look like climbing up this log onto a tree limb to eat my lunch. I had an MRE meal ready to eat, in the same ones they had in the military, and proceeded to drop through some important things from my limb, but had a little lunch up there anyway. This should have been 1, made me smile, and 2, shown them my clumsiness and harmlessness. I am no threat to them, and I'm entertaining too. After lunch, I climbed back down the log and took pictures all around me, starting with selfies. I would periodically point the camera out in the woods in hopes of getting something. So far, I have never gotten a photo, but let's not forget about the audio recorder. It's a good half an hour before the battery died. As my first recording of my friends hanging around my camp, it is not bad. I hear one there, messing with my coffee pot, bumping the recorder, picking stuff up and putting it back down. When I had gone back there to retrieve my stuff that morning, I found everything in its place. There was no sign whatsoever that anyone had been there. I have since found this to be very true every time I go, except for one. That is another story. This all happened 6 years ago. Since then, they have come to trust me. Although we have not met face to face, they visit my camp every time I'm there. I am thrilled every time. I will write again, as this was only the beginning of the stories I have to share with you. I am always armed, by the way, with a small .32 on me and a cowboy pistol. Big, long-barreled, straight shooter of some kind. I always have bear spray as well and a walking stick. So last week I moved into a new house with my mom. We just moved to basically the middle of nowhere in North Carolina. I like it here though. We have lots of lands, and towards the end of our property is a heavily wooded area. On the other side of the woods is a small lake, so I thought it would be fun to explore the woods and swim in the lake with my old English sheepdog, Pepper. In our old town, I wake up early and take Pepper with me on morning walks, and many days I had off from work, we'd go down to the Pisgah National Forest to hike and swim. We also camp here a lot, so I know the area well. So when we moved, I just knew that Pepper would love to go through walks through the woods, and especially the swimming. Yesterday morning, I woke up bright and early and Pepper and I started walking. Usually when we go on walks, she's all excited and will run ahead of me, then run back to me, and so on and so forth. We were walking in the woods when we came across a small stream. It was small enough just to step across, so I went to cross it, but Pepper wouldn't come. I called her, but she just refused to come across the stream. I went and pulled on her collar, but she sat down and whined. So instead of trying to force her across, I just decided to turn back and try the next day. But on our walk back, instead of running around excitedly, she stuck to my side, kind of protectively. She's usually really friendly, but in this situation, she was very tense and it seemed like she was sensing that something was wrong. She can be like that sometimes. I picked up the pace because I was kind of spooked, and as we walked, I swear I heard footsteps behind us, but I just shrugged it off as maybe a curious animal. The footsteps stopped when we left the woods. Earlier today, I woke up as usual, and this time I brought my pocket knife because yesterday kind of scared me. We arrived at the stream and still, Pepper would not come. I heard rustling in the undergrowth on the other side of the stream and Pepper started growling. I turned around and started walking quickly to my house. We were maybe 10 feet away from making it out of the forest when Pepper froze, turned around, and started snarling. I have never seen her like this. I looked behind me, and there was this thing. It kind of looked like if you mixed a badger and a wolf and gave it bull horns, but it was still kind of dark, so maybe I didn't see it right. I walked quicker, and Pepper came but was acting all defensive. We had just made it out of the woods when this thing charged. It ran really slowly and clumsily though. Pepper lunged at it and I took my knife out. I called Pepper back and tried to stab this thing. I hit what was maybe its shoulder, I'm not sure. It let out a noise I've never heard before, almost like a squeal, but really deep in pitch, and kind of distorted. It was terrifying, but it ran off after I stabbed it. I ran back to my house later that night and checked Pepper for any wounds, but she was fine. I also noticed that the very tip of my knife had blood on it, but I know it felt like my knife went further in. I even had trouble pulling the knife back out. If you, or any of your viewers, have any idea what this is, I would love help identifying it. Two years ago, when I was 13, I encountered something in the woods which at first appeared to be a deer, but the next night I saw it, it was something completely different. At least I think anyway. Maybe it was using an appearance that I knew would scare me. Anyhow, this was a few months after. I didn't go outside at night, but I didn't mind staying up late alone. My grandmother had a big size house, so we lived with a lot of family members and a lot of dogs. My brothers, mom, and I slept in the basement, which had built-in rooms. While my 3 uncles and grandmother slept on the main floor, my aunt and her boyfriend had the attic. I am, and was, a child who would stay up playing video games, and not some girly games either, I mean some horrific games. Anywho, I was online playing with my friends when I started to hear what sounded like one of our bigger dogs barking outside. I was so zoned into my game I thought maybe someone went out with him or something, or maybe didn't remember to bring him in, you know, things happen. So, I opened the door looking around, but I left the screen door closed though as I scanned the yard. He wasn't there, so I thought it was weird and closed the door, locking it and going back to my game. Suddenly, I heard a tapping on the window behind me. I should probably mention that I'm in the dining room at the table. It has 2 windows, one next to me and the other right behind me, which is where the tapping was coming from. I looked behind me, but didn't see anything, so I ignored it. About an hour went by and it was like 4 in the morning. A few of my friends were still on, and they were doing some weird truth or dare thing. I know what truth or dare is, but what I'm saying is the way they were playing it just wasn't right. Anyhow, this was about the time where I heard a very weird thing come from behind me. It almost sounded like a hiss or something. I turned around and quickly saw what I think is a canine-looking thing. It was on all 4s, which was what freaked me out. The reason for this is because I could clearly see its head from the window, but the window was at least 6 feet off the ground. So if this thing was on all 4s, it must have been massive. If my uncle was jumping, he could barely see the top of his head through that window. What was worse though, is that this dog's face looked like it was torn up as if something ripped chunks out of its head. At first, I was fascinated by it. As I said before, I've always liked the unknown. You may say then, why did I panic? But when I saw this creature from the woods, I just felt this intense fear. I can't even explain it. This thing, it gave me this feeling that I've never felt in my life, and I just am having a hard time explaining it to you. It just looked at me, and I'm not sure what the hell it exactly was, but it was something a kid would, probably not want to look at. Then, my dog Quiche ran into the room. She started snarling at this thing, and that's when it hit me. I was in some weird trance or something because as soon as my dog snapped me out of it, I realized something was at the door rattling it and trying to get in. I realized the thing at the window was gone, and that feeling was back. I previously said earlier I locked the door, and thank God I did. I left my computer behind and stood next to my dog. Through the window of the door at the very top, I saw this thing peering through. The way it looked at you wasn't right. Its face was disfigured. The growling from my dog woke up my uncle, and I yelled out telling him what was outside. Being the skeptic he was, he opened the door to look outside only to see a dog running away. He looked at me and booped my dog on the nose with a magazine roll. It was just some dog now. Go to sleep, he said. Maybe it was. I was up all night and maybe I was just sleep deprived. All I know is I hate being near windows at night now. I'm a 15-year-old now, and when this event occurred, I was around 13. I've only told one close friend about this, probably because a lot of family would probably think that I'm weird, because they're skeptical. But after this, I refused to go alone in the woods. About 2 years ago, my family, for the summer, was staying at my grandmother's who lived on a farm. Plenty of the land she owned was covered by the forest. In previous years, I'd always go out there, but I was never allowed to be alone. Now that I was a bit older, my mom agreed to let me go alone. Keep in mind, I knew this place like the back of my hand, so I had no fear of getting lost and was fine with going off as far as I'd want. I went out for a walk. There was a large hill that led down to the stream that I used to go to catch minnows and crawdads. So, that is precisely what I did since there was a lake that we'd most likely be fishing at during in the summer. Now, I knew there were animals in the woods, and I loved to follow their tracks and whatnot, so I knew very well their behaviors, and a deer would not go near you, especially if you were making noise, right? I was catching the minnows like I would any other day, and suddenly I heard a snap. Looking up, I saw a deer looking at me. Any person would probably think, oh cool, but I was making a lot of noise as I splashed through the water, so it wasn't an oh cool moment. It was more of a confusion moment. I can't explain it, but a wave of fear came over me and my pit in my stomach just grew heavy. I knew something wasn't right. I immediately got up and put my shoes on, closely watching this thing as my heart was racing. You may think, really, you're overreacting a bit. Maybe I was, but I couldn't get rid of that gut feeling. I raced away up the hill and out of the woods. My clothes were soaked, so running was difficult, and I have asthma, so that was even worse. My chest hurt as I exited the trees to reach the field. If I kept running, I'd reach the house within 10 minutes. However, I could feel my legs were giving out on me. Luckily, the lake which was in view was being occupied. My uncle and 2 little brothers were there. I fell to my knees sitting, trying to catch my breath. My uncle was confused and I just told him I needed to use the bathroom, and after all that, I did. I caught my breath and started walking back. I got the pit in my stomach again. I probably shouldn't have done this, but I looked over back at the tree line, and I'll be damned that deer was standing right there. My friend lived next to my grandmother, and later that night I told her about it. What she told me was that she believed that what I saw was the same thing she's seen a few times. I calmed down wondering if maybe the animals were just not scared or something. The next night we were having a bonfire and there were a good 10 people outside, so I wasn't worried. Sitting on the log, I looked out into the field. Maybe 20 or 30 feet away, I saw it again. There was this thing right there. It stood around. I don't know how tall it was, but it was huge. When I first saw it, I froze, and then let out a scream, bolting into the house. I'm a bit ashamed to say I peed myself. I had never felt so terrified in my life. It was a tall figure. The moonlight gave me just enough light to see the face, which was like a dog's snout and sharp teeth. It looked like the rest of its head was covered by a skull. I can't erase that sight from my mind. I had nightmares for several nights after this. I know I'm a baby, and I won't lie, that I still love horror stuff and supernatural things. But that thing was too much. It never tried to attack me, but the voice in my head at that moment just screamed for me to run. This following experience is very true. I've never actually written this down before, and I don't think I've told anybody either. This happened between 1989 and 1990, and I was about the age of 4 years old. To this day, I still get chills thinking about it, and I wonder if some way, some unknown thing changed me. My parents had a house in the Inland Empire of Southern California, and at the time this happened, my brother hadn't been born yet, so I was still the only child. To give you a layout, my parents' house was a 2-story house located in a cul-de-sac. On the bottom floor, there were 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, the living room, and the kitchen. The second floor was just the master bedroom and bath. All you could see from the street was the garage and one of the bedroom windows on the bottom floor and the window of my mom's bathroom on the second floor. To get to the front door, you had to walk along the cement pathway that ran along the side of the house. You had to pass the first bedroom that you can see from the street. When you passed the bathroom window and another bedroom window, and then you see the front door. The backyard was beyond that point. My bedroom at the time was the bedroom next to the front door. Now for some reason, my blinds weren't completely down to the bottom of the window. There was about a 6-inch gap and nothing covering it. I was pretty young, so I didn't really care much about it then. The bed was in the middle of the wall, across from the bedroom door. To the left was the window. According to my mom, this all happened right before midnight. My mother was asleep in her room upstairs, and my dad was a policeman that worked nights in another city. I was fast asleep in my room, and out of nowhere I suddenly woke up looking at the ceiling. I don't know what woke me up, or if I just popped awake on my own. After my eyes adjusted to the nightlight in my bedroom, I sat up and started looking around my room. All of a sudden, something caught my eye at the window in the gap. First, I thought it was the streetlight reflecting on the window. I knew for a fact that there was only one streetlight that I was looking at and 2 obvious glowing spots that were spaced apart as if it was on someone's face. Then I thought, is that a cat looking at me? Yes, I vividly remember thinking these things, trying to debunk this at 4 years old. I had remembered then at my cat Chelsea's eyes would reflect at night. This looked different than that though. The cat's eyes would almost have different colors when reflecting. These were 2 very solid bright white glowing eyes looking straight at me. I just stared at them frozen stiff, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I couldn't see a face at all. The eyes were just so bright that nothing else stood out. That void or face around the eyes looked blacker than the night. I thought again, well, if this is a cat, how could a cat be looking like a person? And why would a cat stand up and stare in my bedroom? The curiosity got me and I went for it. I flipped my covers off, turned my little 4-year-old body towards the window, and put my feet on the floor. This is the moment the creepiest thing that have ever happened to me happened, and it will forever be burned into my brain. I got off the bed and got on my knees to get a closer look at the so-called cat. When at this very moment, this faceless pair of glowing white eyes began to slowly and steadily tilt to the side, very similar to Michael Myers in Halloween. Eyes still locked on me, not blinking one time. The feeling of dread and fear shot through my body. Completely terrified, I burst into tears immediately and booked it down the hallway, through the living room, and up the stairs to tell my mom. Although I was going as fast as I could, I felt like it took forever. When I got to my mom, I was so upset, I couldn't get any words out. Tears were streaming down my face. My mom was becoming seriously concerned at this point. She was able to calm me down just enough to get the words, there are white eyes. And my mom was confused. She asked me if I was sure, and I cried out yes. She didn't even go down to look, she just called the police. I don't remember the time it took for them to arrive or what they said because I finally fell asleep in my mom's bed. I do remember faintly waking up to a knock on the door and my mom getting it open. The cops speak to her, and they say, "Okay, thank you and good night." She shuts the door. "Did they find it?" I ask her, half asleep. "No, honey, they couldn't find anyone." My mom told me softly, "It's okay now, just go back to sleep." It's safe to say that the next day, my whole window was covered. Years later, I'm in middle school now. Every now and then, I would think about that night. Sometimes I wondered if that moment was real and if those eyes were really there, or if I was just imagining it. Those unforgettable white eyes. One day a random thought came up and I asked my mom if she remembered that night. She tells me, yeah, of course, why? I don't know, I was wondering, I guess, I asked. When my mom proceeds to say, "Well, I never told you this, but when the deputy came out that night, he told me they made it a priority to get our house as soon as they could, because not very long before, I called 911 and they received another call from someone else reporting that something or someone was looking through the window with bright white eyes in our same neighborhood." Hearing that sent chills down my spine, and to this day I wonder what that thing was that was looking at me that night. I just highly doubt it was a person, because those eyes were so real and they glowed so vividly. This is a short story about an incident that terrified me very much whenever it happened. I was helping out my grandfather's reserve one day. It was a small reserve with 50 people or so. My grandfather told me to go kindling for the new fire. So, I headed into the deep woods. I was armed only with a silver knife my father gave to me when I was 10 years old. I headed to a nearby dead tree. I salvaged all the dead branches and leaves I could, and my bag was full. So I started heading back to the camp. I heard this beautiful chirping sound deeper into the woods. It sounded like it would be a delicious meal to hunt. I headed deeper into the woods to where this sound was coming from, and then this eerie sense told me that I was being watched. I then smelled this terrible scent. It was like burning flesh that was rotted. I heard a terrifying scream that made me fear for my life. I was shook for a second, but I could not move. I snapped back to my senses and ran. I ran as fast as I could back to the reserve. I told my grandfather about it and he then told me the terrifying tale of the Wendigo, and I presumed it was that creature that I encountered. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed these stories with allegedly true cryptid encounters, be sure to hit that like button as it helps me out a ton. If you're new to the swamp, why not subscribe and turn on notifications to never miss a new video, as I upload them almost every single day, and all things natural and supernatural. If you have an encounter with a cryptid or something similar and you want to share it on a future episode, be sure to submit your story at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that keep this channel moving forward. These ones were some pretty creepy ones. A lot of interesting tales there and some details that are definitely odd and unexplainable. If you made it this far in the video, comment down below letting me know your favorite cryptid creature. I'll pick one comment to win a free shirt. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.